Welcome back. I know that we're covering World War One rather quickly here, but you do have your readings, and so I'm relying on you at this time to get some of those things in, look at some pictures, that sort of thing. But I'd like for us to talk about how World War One comes to an end. Okay, this was a total war. What that means is that everything that a nation has, including its civilians, are being thrown into the effort to fight the war, to win the war. And so all these countries are giving it their all. And so civilians, unfortunately, are going to become a part of the casualty count. Um, for example, they had conscription, they drafted people. So you didn't have a choice whether you fought or not, they called on you. They taxed people to pay for the conflict, which is something the United States has been doing recently, but every war we've had up until the late 20th century, we were taxed to pay for it. And many countries borrow money. A lot of countries borrow money from the United States, which is part of the reason why we ultimately joined the Allies, because we had loaned the Allies so much money. And if they were defeated, we probably weren't going to get this money back. The really sad thing is, after it's all said and done, we didn't get most of this money back. Uh, Also, too, there was a blockade that took place. Britain was trying to cut off Germany from getting access to imports by blockading the North Sea, and Germany retaliated by creating a war zone with their U-boats surrounding the British Isles. Many people think that when the passenger ship Lusitania was torpedoed in 1915 and it killed over 1,200 people, there were about 200 Americans on board. Many people mistakenly think this is what brought us into the war. And actually, it kept us out of the war for a little bit longer period of time because the outrage was so great and Germany did not want us to aid the British. They pledged to stop unrestricted submarine warfare. So for another year and a half, we stay out of this conflict. Germany does keep their agreement. Another thing that's used with total war is propaganda. You want to make yourself look really good. You want to make your enemies look really bad. And so there's a lot of emphasis on the atrocities that the Germans created. They called the Germans the Huns, for example, and portrayed them as being animals and brutal. Another aspect, too, is that women are utilized in total war to fill in the jobs that men do as they would be pulled to the front. So women are doing construction jobs, they're doing manufacturing work that usually men did. And this is one of the things that led to the recognition of women being able to vote by the 1920s. 1917 was a year of change in the war. People were starting to get really tired of it, and that was being expressed through people, you know, like refusing to fight. There were people that were executed because they basically deserted, and so people were starting to have a big morale problem. Russia pulls out in 1917 because of the revolution that's going on there, and we entered this war. Part of it is that Germany starts sinking ships again. They're trying to push the British to surrender, and they start sinking American ships. The Germans also send a telegram to Mexico urging them to fight against the United States, and then Mexico would get back the entire Mexican cession. This pushed the United States over the edge, and so in April of 1917, they declare war. We're really skipping over a lot of things here because, but it took us about a year to mobilize. It took us a year to get soldiers trained and to finally get them over there. Our soldiers did add some much needed fresh men to the Allied side. And of course, our supplies that we're sending over were tremendous help as well. All of these were things that ultimately demoralized the Germans. And by 1918, we'd had 2 million people there. And so Germany was on the verge of surrendering. One of the things, though, that, and I'll back up a second here, that President Wilson, who is the president of the United States in this time period, he has a plan for what's going to happen after the war, something called the 14 points. I'm not going to go into all the 14 points here, but there's two things that he really wanted to push. One was the idea of self-determination, that ethnicities should have their own countries if they want them, and there should be an organization that's created basically to maintain world peace, which he called the League of Nations. Uh, in November of 1918, November the 11th to be exact, Germany does surrender, and that is the declaration of the armistice, the ceasefire that stopped the war. We recognize armistice today as Veterans Day. So that's the connection with our Veterans Day observance. Lots of human cost in this time period. You see that 8.5 million soldiers and 6 million civilians were killed in this war. Also, the Spanish flu, which hit the world in this time period, killed, we don't really know how many people, but conservative estimates are 20 million people died. There's a lot of widespread destruction and displacement of people. And you had basically the foundations of some later arguments of the 20th century between more conservative people who wanted to return to the way that things were before the war, and radicals, some of whom were communist, wanted to see changes. There also was a big push for colonial independence. So people in Africa and Asia wanted to be free of European rule. The Paris Peace Conference, which was held to negotiate the settlement that's going to end the war, the big three were the leaders of the United States, Britain, and France. The Treaty of Versailles, which was passed, ultimately placed all the blame for the war on Germany. And Germany basically had to pay for the war. Germany had to reduce the size of its military. They lost territories. They lost their colonies. Germans that were living in different parts of Europe had to move. This was a very humiliating defeat for the Germans. And ultimately, it's going to be one of the things that's going to lead to the Second World War. There were lots of new nations that were created: Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Czechoslovakia, which doesn't exist anymore, Austria, Hungary, and Yugoslavia, which has been broken down into a couple of other states as well. All the former colonies of the Central Powers were taken and given to either France or Britain for safekeeping until they could gain the ability to be independent. A lot of nations walked away from this treaty unhappy. Germany felt like they were being unfairly blamed. Italy wanted some lands that they didn't get. Japan wanted some concessions. China felt like that their needs were being ignored. And Russia, which had already backed out of the war with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, they felt like that they weren't being treated fairly at all. And so that's causing some discontent. The League of Nations was created, but the United States refused to join because they didn't want to give up their ability to declare war. They wanted to be able to choose that they did that. And Article 10 of the League's charter said that all nations were obligated to support member nations that were attacked. And because we didn't join it, it was a very weak, ineffectual body. You can see from this map how Europe basically looked before. So these are the countries that existed in 1914. And you see by 1920, particularly the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You see the Ottoman Empire is no longer found in Europe. You see that the Baltic states are created from Russian and German areas. Poland is a brand new country. So, it did change the landscape of how things were laid out in Europe.